Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ryan from Corners Unknown. I'm here with Connor and Graham Williams. We are here to talk about a couple films, and the hope of this new little series or podcast is to essentially talk about these obscure films at length and try to touch more specifically or focus more specifically on the soundtracks that are paired with these films. For this episode, we're going to be speaking or talking about Tetsuo, the Iron Man. People know who Connor is, but I don't know about Graham, so I don't know if we want to introduce ourselves in any way for this.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm Graham. I record under Less Than One and a couple of other pseudonyms.
And then Connor, I can't really speak to this. You can talk about this a bit for folks to know, but you work in the film industry, so I think it will be your perspective will be interesting to add to this because you have the technical lighting perspective. So if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, well, I guess it never really came up in any other thing we talk about, but yeah, I do a lot of lighting and corporate and indie films and music videos and all that stuff. So yeah, I know. Yeah, pretty much know what goes on in all these the creation of all these films and whatnot.
Yeah, no, and I think that's gonna definitely offer so that should make the conversation hopefully a little more interesting. So we're gonna do our best to focus on the scores, but with Connor's technical expertise, I think that would be interesting to note as well, because when I watch film reviews or things of that sort, I don't really get the impression that a lot of people talk about the lighting as much or the technical aspects, and since you have a keen eye for that, I don't know, I think that'd be cool. Maybe you could talk about goofs or really cool things that they do that you've never seen before. I don't really know what I'm talking about.
I feel like my vocabulary for lighting will be better than my vocabulary for the music.
Right. Well, we'll figure it out. Yeah, so Tetsuo the Iron Man, I think that this is easily, I think a lot of folks know this film or they've heard of it in some sense. It's a pretty cult movie and seems to have a relatively large following, at least in like underground circles. This was written and directed by Shinya Tsukamoto. It was released in July of 1989, and it's a relatively short film, about 67 minutes in length. Kind of this strange, really out there kind of body horror, very fetishized, sexualized film about a salaryman and his girlfriend hit and run this guy who has a fetish for putting metal objects into his body, and they hit him with his car in an accident, I believe, and they leave him for dead in a ditch or in the woods, essentially, and he didn't actually die, the fetishist, this metal fetish guy, and he is the film is essentially just a revenge flick where it's definitely a little denser than that, but the fetish guy essentially exacts his revenge on the salaryman and his girlfriend by turning the salaryman into essentially this walking piece of scrap metal. Yeah. Very, very strange film, but I absolutely love it. And this film definitely, I think, a lot of obvious comparisons and influences. And I read a bit of a snippet or a chapter in a book written by Tom Mess, and he spoke with the director at length over his entire career, and there was an entire chapter dedicated to just Tetsuo the Iron Man, noting, and the director himself noted a bunch of influences, and you get like David Cronenberg vibes, J.G. Ballard, David Lynch, Eraserhead, things like that coming through this film. And the score for this film was written by Chu Ishikawa, who was born in 1966, and he actually passed away just about 4-ish months ago in December 2017. He was only 51, so rest in peace. We're hoping this conversation can somehow pay some tribute to the work he did for this film, and seeing this movie has definitely gotten me more entrenched in his robust discography or kind of his very interesting trajectory in industrial soundscapes. But yeah, do you guys have anything to add? I have a couple notes about Mr. Ishikawa, but I don't want to talk the whole time, so.
The director, Shinya, that would pronounce it?
Shinya Tsukamoto.
I found it interesting how he did so much for the film, because it was obviously pretty low budget. Yeah, how he's listed as the art director, he was the editor.
Yeah.
It looks like he did, like, part of the cinematography, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the one female in it, who I believe was the wife, or what
the girlfriend, essentially. Yeah. You're talking about the lady in the apartment, correct? Not the lady that attacks him. Yeah.
But how she did a lot of the stuff too. Costume design, cinematography.
Right, and the film.
So it looks like the two of those kind of joined together and really made the film happen.
Right. Yeah, and apparently there was the production of this film was very troubled and very drawn out. It took a long time to make this happen, and a lot of the film takes place in one location in the lady's apartment, in the girlfriend's apartment. Do you have a name for her? It was Fukiwara for the bulk of the film, and you can tell why they did that, because that's the way that, you save money without having to go to a bunch of locations and such. So they filmed it, but essentially the director Tsukamoto, in the book, he said almost, like the crew lived in the apartment and filmed in the apartment for months, and essentially every day he would come to film, like somebody else on the team would have left. So like the production was super troubled. The lighting team eventually all just quit. So he,
Really?
So Tsukamoto, he had to take it upon himself to really make this film happen, and apparently he burned a lot of bridges, a lot of friendships, and I don't even think he talks to Fukiwara anymore. I don't even think that they speak anymore. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in just kind of in the production of this. But as Connor said, Tsukamoto, I think he did like all the stop motion that you see throughout the film and things like that. He essentially took the reins and did most of the work by himself at the end of the day. So
it's a true passion project right there.
Right. Is there anything on your end, Graham?
You're spot on, as I understand it, with the acrimonious circumstances the film was made within.
Right.
I think that in some respects bled through into the film, because that sort of claustrophobic tension you feel because of the way it's been filmed and how they must have been feeling. That spills out into the film, I think, and it adds to that sort of slightly off-kilter feeling that the film gives you, because it just spirals.
Well, the film opens up with this kind of jarring camera movements. They're just all over the place.
Yeah.
And you're just going through heaps of junk metal, kind of like you're in a scrapyard. And then you have the great industrial landscape that created in the music.
The opening scene reminds me a little bit of the opening or some of the precursor to Eraserhead, but I guess what's different about this too is like how close the camera is to everything. Like, this like trash heap of industrial, just like scrap metal essentially. And what did you I know, Connor, you haven't seen this, but kind of like from the opening scene, like how did it you didn't see this until I noted this to you, and before we started talking, like what were your impressions of it? Like what kind of feelings did it, what kind of feelings did you get from like the opening scene when you were watching it?
Well, first off, I was like, oh boy, this is already going to be quite the strange experimental film.
Right.
Little I know how experimental it would become. But
right.
Yeah, right off the bat, I was just kind of disturbed and felt uncomfortable. And then after that initial scene, it goes straight, like the sound cuts out, and you hear this man groaning as he's digging into his leg with a piece of metal.
Yeah, that.
And at that point, I was just like, "Oh boy, this is gonna be quite the ride."
Yeah, and he takes like the metal pipe and he like grinds it against his teeth, like he pulls it between his teeth, and it like just shimmers or it makes like that grating sound. And then he just like sticks it under his flesh. Oh God, I'm just getting chills thinking about it.
But I love how they did that a lot with just the noises they capture in the film.
Yeah,
the scratching of metal and just noises that make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. And what'd you guys think about the track? Because that song like is very notable to me because it definitely comes back throughout the film. This opening track while the guy is kind of in this weird metal confine.
Yeah, that first track that establishes, like you say, the lead motif running through the whole of the soundtrack. You know, that gives us the character's musical identity.
Yes.
Straight from the beginning, and as Connor says, a lot of the noises, whilst not strictly part of the music, like he says, that abrupt cut from that to the screeching metal, in the same way as Eraserhead has that constant drone running through the whole film.
Yeah.
There's very few moments of respite in Tetsuo, and as Connor says, cutting straight into that discordant screeching. You know you're in for a rough ride with this film.
Right. Yeah. And there was a funny. It was kind of a cute moment, or just like a funny bit when I was reading that book, and Ishikawa had a couple quips about the soundtrack and making the soundtrack, and essentially Tsukamoto said make the music with just metallic or like industrial stuff, and he was apparently Ishikawa tried this. So Ishikawa, this is the first official soundtrack I think he ever made for a film. He was making music before this, but he said he tried to make songs just using like metallic clangs, and he's like, this is ridiculous, like I can't do this. So he ended up, kind of infusing it with his own flavors to kind of give it, to make it what it is. But apparently Tsukamoto was like, oh, make it with just industrial, like just like metal noises. And he was like, well, I can't really do this. It's like very limiting, apparently, from a production perspective, which makes sense. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another thing I noticed about the initial track, what is it called? Drop Hammer?
Drop Hammer, yep, that's it.
It has so many different layers of strange metallic industrial noises.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like it's going down a conveyor belt, like something metal's being built in a way.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, that's a good observation.
You go from one industrial sound to the next. I can just picture, I don't know, a car being developed or something, yeah.
Right. And just as an interesting side note, that Drop Hammer track, I was on YouTube listening to some of Ishikawa's early work, and under one of his projects, I believe it was the Zeitlich Vergelter. I pronounce that awfully, but he, with his group, they had a track called PROGFC-4, which came out in '86, and that song is actually a prototype of the Drop Hammer song, which I thought was really interesting. I couldn't, like, the synapses fired when I was listening to it yesterday, and it's almost identical, but just not nearly as dense as you pointed out, Connor, with the more conveyor belt, laden with all these metallic clangs and harsh noise. But I just thought I'd note that because I thought that was really interesting, like just it being a prototype song. But I almost associated the opening track with just the metal fetishist guy. Like, the track seems to recur each time the fetishist is coming into play in some form or another in the movie.
Yep.
Kind
it's
of
definitely
like
his theme song.
Yeah, and I almost equated it to like the Jaws soundtrack or something, like the Jaws theme, kind of like it's like when that track comes in, shit's gonna hit the fan, almost like something crazy or something disgusting is about to happen. I only noticed that really on the second rewatching of the film, because the first time I was just freaked out by what the hell was going on, and I was trying so hard to like not tear my eyes away. But
it was funny because when I was watching it, I came up with like my own nicknames kind of for the characters.
Oh, really?
Like, I called the fetishist dude Trash Heap Man.
Right.
So when I would hear that music, I'm like, oh, here comes Trash Heap Man.
Yep. And I kind of laughed when you have the fetishist, so he comes out of that, he puts the rod in his leg, and there's like infested with maggots somehow, like the maggots just start crawling out of his leg, and he's running down the street panting, and then he gets like hit by the car, but it's like that, it's kind of like this upbeat jazz music, and I on the second watching, I found that kind of funny. I was like, oh, is this supposed to be like tongue-in-cheek? Because I don't know, it was just kind of like all happy and kind of like upbeat and rhythmic, and I don't know what you guys thought of that note or that musical.
In my notes, it was really just like saxophone jazz. What?
yeah, it just kind of came out of nowhere.
Connor's right. You hear that and you just, why am I suddenly jazzing out in
right.
the middle of this film? But in the late 80s, there was a resurgence of interest in jazz in Japan.
Oh.
You know, if he was inspired to make something so utterly incongruous to what's going on in the film.
Right.
And
right.
whether the experiment worked or not, you certainly remember that scene because of that music, which seems to have been peeled off another much happier film and just dropped into the middle of this film.
I tried figuring out where that jazz bit comes from. I couldn't figure out where it comes from. Like, I just couldn't find anything Google searching. I was really interested.
Going through YouTube videos, I like kept seeing comments of people like digging for that song.
Yeah. I was wondering, I'm like, is this like an American thing or is this like a Japanese song? Like, I was like, I just want to know where it came from. So what basically happens after that? So they hit the fetishist, they dump his body.
And then it kind of introduces the film overall. Like, you see the frantic, sweating man in like kind of a dimly lit room.
Yeah, at first I thought he was like flash dance.
Industrial music.
Yeah, at first I thought he was like flash dancing. I'm like, what the hell is this? And then I was like, oh, this is like the title. Like, this is kind of the way it opens. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and it like cuts to it and like images of just industrial metal, I don't know, clips, and then it keeps flashing to him, and there's like, can't remember if there's like sparks or flames or something too. I don't remember fully.
Yeah,
and then you see the title of the film show up. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, like slowly crawls from left to right across the screen in gigantic bold font or whatever, kind of like, like all staticky, and it almost looks like a late night bar sign or something like that, or like a like a cyberpunk-esque, like a neon sign that's in black and white. Yeah, and then it opens up with the film kind of after that opening bit, it kind of opens up with him shaving in his apartment, right? And he kind of has like that little metal bit sticking out of his cheek, and he kind of like pulls it out, and like it kind of sprays blood on the blood. Right, yeah, and that's kind of like hinting at what I don't know if that speaks to anything specifically about like how he's already infected, or if that's kind of like just alluding to what is gonna come. Yeah, and he's kind of and he bandages it. He throws a bandage on it, and then I think he goes to work, and I believe he steps off a subway, and he's dressed in his attire, and he's like coming off of work, and he's kind of having like a mini panic attack of some sort. He's like sweating profusely, and it somehow seems to kind of relate to like the urban nightmare or something of that sort, kind of like illustrating just like something about the future, or just kind of like urban society. I don't know if that's like a comment on it, but just kind of...
Well, yeah, he's clearly a company man, isn't he? And like you say, I think it's that overall excess of the late 80s, and it just seems to start overloading him. He can no longer process all that information.
So he sits down on a bench next to a lady. He kind of like plops himself down, or kind of like hurries over to it because he's kind of having like an anxiety attack, or like a pang of some sort. And then the lady shifts over a seat, and there's like a pile of like smoldering scrap on the ground. And somehow the fetishist is almost like in this. It's almost like the fetishist is like, he's remote somewhere off in an industrial junkyard, and he's like controlling the scrap of metal in the subway station, essentially. It's kind of a weird, like, he's not there, but he's in control of it. Like, he's kind of like in like a weird headquarter, kind of like a hive room of some sort, a hive room of like industrial scrap.
Yeah, and then the woman starts scratching like her strangely now infected hand, and then things get really weird.
Yeah, so basically the way I interpreted that scene, and this is probably obvious to most folks who watch it, but when I was watching it, I was like, okay, so that's the scene where the guy, the fetishist, is starting to exact his revenge on the salaryman, and that's like where this is basically the scene where the salaryman gets infected at the end of it. And you can see when the lady is like reaching down at the heap with like her pen, she's getting closer to, and you can see like the fetishist kind of tensing up, like, yes, please touch this so I can take control of you, essentially. And then once she does poke it, he kind of assumes or usurps her body and kind of melds with her like, you know, he kind of like gloms onto her arm, and then she starts like scratching it feverishly, and that's just such a, God, I hate that sound, like how she's just scratching it, just like staring dead eyes or whatever, and just looks over at him, and he's just like, oh shit, it's about to hit the fan.
Yeah, well, it really reminded me of like almost like a zombie.
Yeah.
Trash heap zombie creature.
Right.
But the actual song playing during that, it's called Scratch Killer. Super, it was like really 80s synth sounding to me.
Right.
He's hitting you right in your atavistic fear centers with that fear of parasitic infection, like Connor says when she's just scratching away at her arm.
Yeah.
It's compulsive tearing at her arm.
Right.
And it's not something that's easily forgotten. It's such a simple maneuver that she's doing just repetitively and feverishly, frantically. I think that pushes you into that state of discomfort.
And it seems like the lady and some of that compulsive scratching, it's almost like, in a way, would that maybe be illuminating her trying to resist being controlled fully by the fetishist? Like, it seems like she was kind of being zombified or turned into, you know, like a machine to kill the salaryman or infect the salaryman, but it looked like in a couple bits she was kind of like trying to resist it almost. After that, the guy realizes he's getting chased. I don't know if he knows I don't know if the salaryman is under the impression he knows that it's the fetishist who's actually chasing him, but when like they're running through the subway tunnels, like that's a really disorienting bit too. Like that kind of seems to hearken or speak to that industrial urban landscape as well, kind of like how he's running along the pipes and like the camera's super shaky and there's like just a lot of concrete and just there's nobody else around in the subway when you think that there'll be thousands of people. It's just him and this infected lady, and she's just chasing him, and he ends up in the bathroom or whatever. But just like the way the camera's moving and shaking around, and it's just very focused in on his face or from his back or whatever, you know, and it's kind of, it just kind of maintains this, you know, this very anxious vibe just with how close it's following him and, you know, following the girl just behind him.
The dystopian nature of the set where it's going on is, again, all enclosed, industrial, dirty, run down, and it speaks again to that sort of like rusted bleakness.
Yeah, and I thought it was kind of a funny bit. He ends up getting into the bathroom, and he's like, he thinks he's safe, and it's like, you know, it's so I thought it was so naive for him to be like, oh, I just closed myself in a bathroom stall, she's not gonna find me, because it's like, that's like the dead end of the hallway, like that's like the last room he goes in. You know, he doesn't see her, and then like the really caustic, kind of horror-esque soundtrack kicks in when she's on the grate above him, looking down at him, trying to get through with her mangled, you know, metal heap claw. And then he just like takes a pen and like sticks it in her neck. He's just like, oh, I'm gonna try and kill her, and he just like uses a little pen. I was just like, what the hell? Like, I don't know, I just thought it was kind of funny just how he tried to defend himself, and it was like the worst way to do that possible. Like, he had no other, like, he could have tried to grab a metal pipe, or I don't know, like grab the top off the toilet, you know, like I don't know, he could have used anything else, but he decided to use a pen. Maybe that somehow speaks to his persona as kind of like this, you know, maybe he makes a lot of money, but there's some sort of naivete about it or something. Like, I don't know.
Just in office all day and doesn't really know how to defend himself.
Right. Kind of like,
Yeah, all he's got to defend himself is essentially his little pen that he's got from work.
Yeah.
But somehow it manages to work, and the horror-esque overtones of that piece go back to some of the zombie film soundtracks, especially by Goblin. It's a very zombie-esque sequence, isn't it? Yeah,
she has like really weird movements. But I was going to ask too, because Connor, we haven't spoken about we haven't involved your technical expertise yet. Do you have any insights on like the lighting or anything like that, or like is there any like
not cool so much on the lighting? I realize a lot of these like initial scenes don't seem to have much lighting going on.
Is it
kind of to be more natural?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you can see that through the black and white pretty well, like it's pretty obvious.
Usually it's very contrasty, which shows up later in the film, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
Like the choice to make it black and white, you know, in the 80s, late 80s, I really feel like it kind of really made the metal stand out, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I don't know if they did that. I think that they definitely made an artistic choice because the black and white makes it look, you know, it kind of gives off that metallic vibe. And I don't know if it's sometimes, if maybe it was easier because if it was in color, it may have looked like crap as well.
I really feel like, especially with the cosmetics and makeup and costuming of all the strange metal pieces growing out of,
hides some of the
that was definitely a choice for that, I would say.
I've seen a couple people note this, and I think it is worth noting as well. Like, you can almost watch this film as a silent film. Like, if, like, you know, like, just, I think it kind of, the black and white kind of makes it almost seem like a silent film in a way, because there's, I mean, soundtrack, you keep that in, but, you know, there's, like, such little dialogue, really, that goes on in this movie as well. And if there is dialogue, it's relatively straightforward and basic. It kind of just, you know, pieces a small story together
out there.
yeah, but like even thinking back, like if you I don't know if you've seen Eraserhead, Connor, you probably have, but like I would say like you could draw that parallel too. Like that film could almost be seen as like a silent film just with the soundtrack as well, and it seems like you could just let the soundtrack kind of carry you and like kind of emanate the feeling, and you don't even really need to hear the dialogue. It
explains the story.
Yeah, kind of like it just creates such a prevalent and omnipresent atmosphere. Like the words are essentially, I don't want to say meaningless, but like they're really not needed. I guess the only downside to turning off the subtitles is you miss like the best line when the guy asks if the girl wants to taste his sewage pipe. Like that's like the best line, I think. I literally was just like, holy shit, he said that. Like I was blown away when that came out of his mouth. But yeah, you'll definitely miss that. That's like an iconic line, I think. I think everybody knows that, or a lot of people who've seen this. That's like one of the best. That's like one of my favorite bits, and it's also I found it pretty funny. So what basically happens is, the guy gets assaulted or infected by the lady who was being controlled by the fetishist, and then he starts getting infected in the subway tunnel, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's kind of a little motif running through that as well. Like, there's kind of a weird, airy, synthy kind of track that plays during that. Like, he's kind of writhing around between the concrete walls, but there's almost like this uplifting soundtrack to it. It's kind of a strange clash of visual and sound, I think. I don't know if you guys caught that or if you agree with me on that.
Is this a part of the soundtrack called Clock?
Maybe, yeah. It's kind of like a nice uplifting. It's kind of airy. It's like, I don't know, kind of like a nice little piano. It's almost like piano.
Yeah, the piano. Yeah.
Yeah. When he was getting that synthy stuff, I don't. I was trying to think about what that may represent, and for whatever reason, I could be deluded as I usually am. But I kind of got the impression of it was almost like romanticized, kind of like the melding of man and machine or man and metal. Like it almost seemed like the passage was like that synthy passage was kind of like it was airy and light because it almost seemed like a weird like romantic moment almost. I don't know if you got that vibe. Like it almost seemed like it was kind of like a, I don't know, like, yeah, it was like fetishized almost, like there was something beautiful about it. I maybe
definitely, and that sort of like sense of rebirth as well, like you say, the lightening, sort of like this, he's coming up from the morass of mankind and becoming more than man.
Yeah, no, and I think that bit of soundtrack comes back a couple other times throughout the film, a little later on, I believe, but that whole airy synthy bit, it seems to sync up with the moments that the salaryman is kind of undergoing a larger transformation into the metal heap, almost like each time he kind of augments more, like he kind of like gets really overtaken. It seems to play more kind of like he's just getting more entrenched in it. Maybe not, but I that was the impression I got when I watched it again.
Oh, that's when things get really weird. Like the conduit tubing penis sodomizing scene. I was really confused at that point. But
yeah, and she was kind of doing like a strange, almost like ritualistic, tribal-esque dance in the apartment.
Yeah, it was kind of demonic too.
Yeah, and she kind of like the way the shadows were cast on her were kind of like creepy and dark, and like she was like licking the tip of this metallic phalange that she was about to sodomize the salaryman with. Yeah, a lot of very eroticized very erotic scenes with, like, penetration of metal objects. It happens a lot throughout this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then after that, so the salaryman gets sodomized, and then he's back in the apartment with the girlfriend, right? And they're getting it on rather primally. Like, it's pretty much like they're just kind of having sex all over the floor of her apartment or whatever. It's kind of like very...
Even on a metal fan at one point.
Oh, say that again? On the what?
On a metal fan at some point, too.
Oh, really? Oh, shit.
Yeah. It's like, what? Yeah, I kind of found that whole scene to be uncomfortably long, you know?
Just like them going at it.
It's the whole part of the film experience, I guess.
Yeah. And you're talking about them, like, just going at it, and, like, they're just kind of... It's almost like they're, like, wrestling each other, like, really...
Yeah, like brutal.
Yeah, and it stands in really stark contrast to the, like, kind of like the dream-esque sequence prior where his girlfriend sodomizes him. It's kind of like the other way around in this scene where he's kind of just almost like trying to, like, rip her apart almost, or he's just kind of going at it a little too harshly. I don't know. It's a weird, it's a little jarring. I don't know. But then during that, when they're getting it on, the guy starts to get, like, those pangs of he starts to transform a little bit more, right? Like, his body starts to kind of bloat more with kind of the gross scrap metal, and it freaks him out. And he goes and cooks food, and, like, the girlfriend is kind of eating the food very sexually. Like, he kind of, like, makes a sausage, and she's, like, eating the sausage very seductively, and it's kind of, like, making him, like he can, like, hear the sound of the fork scratching on her teeth, and the sound of her eating is making him, like, just on edge. But what I thought was interesting, too, is you have that scene, and then the fetishist starts to kind of usurp control or infect the salaryman further, and that's when his dick literally becomes like a drill bit, like a gigantic drill. And what I thought was interesting is kind of, it seemed like instead of just turning the salaryman outright into, just turning him into a metal heap, he's trying to, like, slowly take away his humanity. And since they dropped the fetishist's body in the ditch, and then the girlfriend got off on it, and she had sex with the boyfriend, or with the salaryman, in front of the guy as he was, like, laying there in the ditch. And it seems like something like he was trying to be like, oh, okay, there's some, just kind of reiterating that sexual nature of the film. Like, he kind of takes away what the salaryman is driven by, like his sexual desire. So it's like, okay, I'm going to take away your pleasure sensory, or whatever, your pleasure sensors, and I'm going to turn your dick into, like, just a flat out drill, essentially. Like, he kind of, like, degrades his humanity by doing that, without killing him outright or turning him into a metal heap.
But slowly torturing him.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's the correct interpretation, but that's kind of what I got from it when watching it. And then it seems like when that happens, it seems like the salaryman kind of loses control, and it seems like the fetishist kind of takes control of him a bit more, because the salaryman kind of becomes more visceral, like a lot more aggressive in a way.
Yeah.
But essentially what happens is the guy's dick turns into a drill. He runs into the bathroom to hide his shame because of what he's turning into. And then the girlfriend tries to console him and say, oh, I still love you. It can't be that bad. And then she sees what his face turns into, because, like, half of his face becomes like a mangled heap. And then she freaks the hell out and tries to escape. And then he holds her back and then tries to penetrate her with the drill. And at that point, the fetishist is under full control of the salaryman's body, it seems. And he's going to use the salaryman to basically murder the girlfriend.
What I found weird, though, is that, like, trying to defend herself and not get killed by, this drill. But at the same time, then she gets like into it or something, like she's down with it.
Yeah. And that was a bit that I found I kind of got a little more clarity on the second viewing, and the impression I was under was, so the guy is under control of the fetishist, trying to kill her, and then there's a weird sexual romantic bit where, they're tussling, they fall to the ground, she stabs him in the neck with a knife, and it's like under his jaw, like, oh god, it's such a gruesome place that just like stabs him, and she's kind of digging the knife into his neck. And at that moment, it seems like the fetishist kind of lets go of the Salaryman, and the Salaryman seems to kind of regain control of his own body. And to me, it seems like that's like the last moment that they two are together as their own persons before she dies, and that's maybe why she gets off on it, because when I watch that moment, he seems to be kind of waking up and realizing what's going on. Like he's, the fetish is kind of taken, he kind of lost control, or he like let go for a minute. And the girl is kind of getting off, and then she, well, it's a pretty gross scene. I thought it was really interesting how they showed that scene too. She basically straddles the drill penis, and then she gets killed, and there's just like blood splatter on the white curtain behind her. It's freaking gnarly. That's like one of the most gruesome scenes I've ever seen in a film. But when that's happening, the guy seems like he's like, oh no, what the hell's going on? Like he kind of has like a worried face, almost like he doesn't realize what just happened. And I could be wrong, but that's kind of the vibe I got. I don't know. Like it seems like there was like, that was like the last moment of them being together, because like he kind of regained his humanity for a moment, and then they try and have sex again, and then she gets killed by him, and he's like, oh shit, what happened? But what struck me about it, I just thought it was really well done too, just because it's like it doesn't show it. I mean, that's what I like about it so much. It's like you just get the imagery, and then you just hear the buzzing, and you just see like the blood just splattering, and it's just like, God, it's such a visceral and disgusting image, and like it just makes you think about what's actually happening. You're just like, oh, like yeah, it's gnarly. Yeah, and then where does that take us next?
The guy like wakes up in water, and you hear like birds chirping.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's supposed to be the next day or whatever. And yeah, then you get more background in the whole car thing.
Yeah, you kind of actually get the story. It's not like vaguely alluded to. It's more like, oh yeah, it was a hit and run, and it was like they left him for dead, and then he actually didn't die. Yeah, that's like where the story like actually like starts to make a little more sense, I think, or it becomes a little clearer as to what's going on. And then that's essentially the scene where the fetishist decides to go now and confront the Salaryman in his own abode, correct? Like that's basically what happens. Like he's kind of in that machinery environment, and he's like, okay, I've killed the girlfriend, now it's time to go face this guy head on. And I thought that was kind of a funny scene too, like after you get some background as to what actually happened. And I don't know, Connor, maybe you could speak to some of the more technical aspects, but like the way that they're traveling down the street, it almost seems like a bunch of like still shots, like, or like a weird like fast forwarding of scenes. Kind of like,
yeah, I like how they did that.
Yeah, what
like
did they
you
do?
see like the weird like jet feet that he just like grows out of his feet.
Yeah. How did they film that? Like, what is like?
I'm assuming they're literally just filming like for 1 second, and then he like stops, like he walks forward a couple feet,
and then they just kind of
film again,
and then they just kind of snip all them together. Okay.
Yeah, kind of like stop motion. But...
Okay. Yeah, I thought that scene was hilarious because basically the Salaryman's at his house, and he's turning into a larger metal heap, and then the fetishist is on his way over, and as he's coming over, he's holding like a bow of flowers in his hand as he's going over there. I thought that was hilarious. He's just like, oh, I'm coming over. Like,
yeah, like he's gonna go on a date with the guy.
I thought it was great. I didn't even realize that till the second view. I'm like, oh man, he has flowers. That's cute. Yeah, and then that's the moment where he gets outside the house, and I think that's when the Drop Hammer song starts playing again, correct? Like, he kind of gets outside the house, and kind of like kind of the undulating, like the mechanical barrage starts coming back in again. And then that's the moment when they both kind of start making themselves more powerful, essentially. So the Salaryman is in his house, and he starts, like, touching all that is metal, and he starts, like, I don't know, kind of creating, he starts, like, enhancing his body. Yeah.
Almost like melding over other things in the house. Like at one point, there's cats getting like covered in molten metal.
Yeah, that was. I was like, oh no, poor little kitty. Like, because the cat, you could tell it had like the metal bit on it, and it was kind of like, wow, like what the hell's going on? And then it's just like this molten corpse or whatever. It's just, oh god, yeah, that was. I felt so bad. Yeah. So in this scene, when they're kind of confronting each other, what I thought was really kind of chilling and cool, from a special effects perspective, was the fetishist assumes control again. He now assumes control of the dead body of the girlfriend, whom the Salaryman made a funeral for in her bathtub, right? Like, he put a lot of flowers around her, and like the Salaryman like takes over her body. And then she gets out of the bathtub and tries to attack him, right? And then she kind of... I can't remember exactly what happens in that moment if you want to fill in the blanks. But she tries to attack him, and then she kind of like crumbles down into like just like this mass of like moss and mold and gross crap. And then out of it formulates the fetishist. If you remember that, like he kind of decomposes, but it's like all stop motion, and it's like super cool to watch. Like, I don't know, there's something about stop motion that I just love. Like, there's just so much work that goes into it, and just watching it play out when it's done well is amazing.
Each frame, like creating or I guess in this way, it was kind of he was melting the skin of the woman into himself.
Right. But I thought that was a real neat moment, just kind of how she decomposes into a heap, because I think he just destroys the body of the girl, or he kills her somehow, the Salaryman does, and then, he formulates, he kind of decomposes, and then, like, you can see, like, his fingers kind of, like, coming out of, like, this weird morass of shit. Yeah, and then it's like, oh, I'm here, and then he's in the apartment, and then they start their fight or whatever, and then the fetishist takes like a television and like smashes it on the head of the Salaryman, and he kind of has like this weird like nose cone helmet looking thing, and then and then this is when the movie starts to get a little weirder, because when they start fighting, it's like the way they're moving is so strange, when it's almost like a stop motion, or like it's kind of like a lot of freeze frames, and then they kind of fast forward them together, and like it's almost like they're like Super Saiyans or something. I don't know. Like, they're like moving around.
They're just flying down the street and sidewalks.
Right. Like they're not really moving. It's like they're just like standing still, almost like a South Park character or something, and they're just kind of like, they're just like I don't know. I mean, that's not a good... Like, they're just kind of standing still and like just moving in these trajectories, and like the way they're fighting, it seems like it's almost not even a physical fight, but almost like a mental fight in the beginning. I don't know if that's the case. That's the impression I got.
There's that weird part where like they go into like this weird, mysterious looking like other world land thing. Yeah, there's this weird like spot where, I don't know, it's probably 2 minutes long. That part was really trippy to me. There's lots of like weird electrical pops and explosion noises and...
Right.
Yeah, and then that's when the battle starts right after that.
And then they go and they fight in the streets. And it's almost like the fetishist is fighting the Salaryman, and they're like, the Salaryman kind of gets the shit kicked out of him. Like, he just like keeps getting knocked. Like, when he gets knocked back, it's like he's going down like city blocks and then like hitting a random concrete wall and falling down, and then he's like going, like, it's just like these interesting ways of just like, I don't know, like the way they battle, like it doesn't just take place in the confines of that apartment. Like, the guy just like they just kind of go flying across city streets, and like they're kind of chasing each other down.
Yeah, sort of goes into the old Toho Godzilla style.
Oh, interesting.
Fighting.
Yeah.
From the older Godzilla film, where again there's a little tip of the hat to that type, and these two Godzilla-esque creatures that they've become. The fight can't be contained within a small area, and it sort of starts spreading out and causing the random destruction, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah, and that's a moment too. I think that is Tsukamoto, the director. I think that he clearly said like Godzilla stuff like influenced him, and there were like certain creature features, like old school ones, that really influenced kind of like the look and the feel of, you know, these beings, kind of like the Godzilla-esque as you were describing. I think that he definitely noted that in some of his interviews and his talks, which is interesting. But yeah, and then we're kind of near the end of the film. Basically, they end up in a warehouse, and the salaryman kind of gets knocked into a corner, and he starts agglomerating or kind of congealing with the metallic wall behind him, and he starts to kind of become a part of the structure, I think, or he kind of just starts like getting too big, and he's kind of like stuck in the corner, right? And then he's approached by the fetishist, who says, "Oh, I'm gonna finish you," or whatever, "I'm gonna kill you." And there is an interesting bit like just before that where the fetishist seems to be getting hurt by some of his memories. I don't know if you guys recall that. There was like a moment where it seemed like a homeless man or his dad was beating him with like an iron pipe.
That part was really trippy. I'm like, wait, who's this guy? Where
that came out of
Why
nowhere. Yeah. It's worth bringing up, though, I think, because that may have been a way to try and describe why this fetishist was obsessed, or why he's obsessed with metal, because there was also that bit where there was a doctor in an office. He's like, "Oh, I can't believe that there's like your brain, like there's a piece of metal in your brain, and this should have killed you, but it didn't, and this is super impressive." And it's just like, you're like, this is kind of your fate or whatever. You probably remember that as well. Those few moments were like strung together in a way that made it seem like that's a very quick backstory for why the fetishist was into metal. I guess that's kind of where the structure of the film is quite jarring, because like you get that detail about him when it would have been, maybe it could have been contextualized a bit better earlier on in the film, because like when I watched it the first time, I was like, what the hell is, like, at first I thought the salaryman got trapped in the warehouse, and then I thought there was a random homeless man just beating him, and then like I rewatched, I'm like, oh, that's supposed to be a flashback, because when he's having those memories, the fetishist is kind of like on the ground, almost like not in a fetal position, but he's kind of like wounded from these memories, like they're kind of being dredged up. And it just comes so late in the film. I don't know. Like it seemed like a way. It was just really jarring the way it was kind of like, not shoehorned, but it was just kind of shoved in there. And you're like, oh, okay, here's some context, but it's like within the last 8 minutes of the movie. And that's kind of a quirk of the movie. But I mean, it's not something that really bothers me. It's just kind of odd. I don't know. When I reflect on it, it seems very random. So essentially, after that, we have the salaryman trapped in the corner of this warehouse, and then we get the fetishist who's like, okay, I'm going to finish you, and he kind of turns his arm into a flamethrower of some sort to go attack the salaryman. And then that's when there's kind of the final moments when the salaryman kind of lets himself be consumed by metal, and he kind of just consumes the fetishist, right? Like they like try to kill each other, and then the salaryman overpowers the fetishist and absorbs him into like this gaping hole in his body, essentially. And then that's when it gets a little weird too, because you think that he kills him, but then it becomes like this weird romanticized, erotic-esque sort of moment, right?
Yeah, they're kind of like two, I don't know, like fetuses in a womb.
Yeah.
Transforming into this new like creature.
Right, and that's where, and then this is where I wanted to note, and this is a long time ago that I talked about this, but this is where like the jazz interlude bit comes back in. Like there's kind of like this uplifting moment, or it's kind of like this beautifully strange moment, and then in kind of out of focus, but right across the front of the camera, there's like a metallic cord, and it almost like reminded me of like an umbilical cord in a way. You know, like they kind of came together, and then I think that they're both not wearing makeup in that scene. I think that they're both just like two humans.
Yeah, they're normal, and they're like nude, and
they're
being rebirthed.
Yeah, and it's like and it's almost like they're touching each other's flesh, completely untainted by metal for the first time. And it kind of, I was like, oh, they're getting to know each other biblically, like they know everything about it. Was kind of, yeah, it's just like a strange little moment. Yeah, and it's kind of like they're like in a black void, like it's kind of like they're just like in a dark room, just kind of floating in space, and then they become one. They amalgamate into this gigantic heap of scrap metal. One of the final lines is, "Our love will destroy this fucking world," or something to that effect. And I was just like, okay, that was, yeah, like I was just like, okay, I guess, like, yeah. And then the end of it is it's implied that they go wreak havoc on the city to turn it into essentially just an industrial or like into
a world of metal,
right? A trash heap, essentially, of just metal and other things. But I do think we should note too the track Megatron, which is the final track of the soundtrack. And it's also, it's alluded to a few times, but that's probably my favorite song next to Drop Hammer, which is kind of like the theme song for the Fetishist. And Megatron crops up a couple times, but near the end when they go destroy the world, like the very last moment, it's kind of has like that flurry of synths, like it's kind of like upbeat and kind of majestic and like really dominating and powerful sounding. I don't know if you know that song title, Connor. Specifically, but I thought that's probably my favorite song on the whole track.
Yeah.
Well, that's the end of this episode. From Ryan, Connor, and myself, thanks a lot for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any thoughts or any queries, please get in contact, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Take care.